Greetings and welcome to In-Depth. I'm Dike Rostant. Now, the Legal Aid and Advisory Authority has provided service to members of society for more than 4 decades. The Public Defender's Office is not yet in double digits, but is making strides. We have the chance to speak with the Chief Public Defender, Hasine Shaikh, who joins us now to shed light on her work and the impact of the office which she leads. Welcome, Ms. Sheikh. How you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
It is our pleasure because, and we're going to do some world building. So we're going to get this from the ground up. When we say the Public Defender's Department, if that is a solution, what was the gap or the challenge, and how does this help?
So, the Public Defender's Department, established in March of 2020, was basically created to provide essentially the flip side of what the DPP's office provides. So, we are meant to provide we're state paid attorneys who provide criminal defense representation. So the gap that really existed at that point in time is that we did not have such a department at all. What we had was considered to be private attorneys who were briefed out legal aid work, which poses its own problem because obviously private attorneys would also be balancing that with their own work. So it's a little bit different because now all the Public Defender Department does is legal aid, and we do it at the High Court and the Court of Appeal stages.
And so if someone says, okay, well, I need this service, how do they go about going from I need this service to be able to access the Public Defender's Department?
So there are multiple ways that it can happen. If you are not in custody and you are outside on bail, you can walk into any of the legal aid offices. We have in Tobago, San Fernando, Arima, Shogunas, and of course the head office that is in Port of Spain. So you can walk in, you can let them know that you need to have an attorney, and they would fill out the relevant applications and you'll be processed. If you are in custody, you have two options really, which is you can ask prison welfare to list you, and they send us a weekly list whereby we see those persons who require legal aid. And then if that is not an option available to you for whatever reason, you can also request it before the court. Now, the court can do an assessment and decide if you're fit for legal aid, and then they can make the relevant order, which is then sent to us.
And with that in mind, I need to ask what some of the criteria in terms of asking, okay, yes, you are fit.
So, and this is where the civil and criminal aspects differ significantly. So as you said, we fall under the Legal Aid and Advisory Authority, of which there is a civil arm. Now, the civil arm is different in that you have a means test that you have to satisfy, and you have to be able to be assessed in that way. And of course, there's a little bit difference in that as well, because usually you're not in custody and you pay your $50 and you can get advice, and all of those things are a little bit different from our side. On the criminal aspect, the judicial officers are the ones who make that assessment as to whether or not you're fit for legal aid. So they usually look at your means as well, but often most of our clients being in prison and unable to work, and usually are persons of little to no means. So therefore, they usually qualify.
And it's interesting because we started off the conversation with the comparison between the authority and the PDD, and looking at that chain or that gap in years. Is it a matter of saying, okay, well, you've come into the system in 2020 and there's this backlog? Is it that and I say that and I see your face already making these things, but what are some of the challenges that you face thus far? Is it the backlog? Is it the fact that people don't know that they can access this? What are some of those things that you're facing, and how is you dealing with them?
So I think the challenges we face the backlog is a challenge for any stakeholder at this point in time. COVID simply didn't assist that process, because with COVID, we obviously had an even bigger drain in terms of we weren't able to have court. A lot of matters got pushed back. So what was previously the case, which was not even working as effectively as we would have liked. It got a little bit worse. So, just to give you an average, we have something to the effect of about 2,500 matters at the high court level that are awaiting trial. So when you look at that number, and that's just legal aid matters. These are not persons with, who have private attorneys. So when you just look at that sheer number of matters, and of course we have about 13 criminal judges currently, and you can only do so many matters at one point. Um, issue that we face. It's obviously not the only issue. I mean, other things that would arise, of course, would lie in terms of just working with the other stakeholders to get things done in a more efficient way. We obviously cannot go to trial for every matter. We recognize that in the past couple of years, thankfully, and the legislation has borne that out as well. So the use of the Plea Bargain Act, the use of the MSIs, which is maximum sentence indications, whereby persons could essentially ask the court, if I wish to plead guilty, what am I going to get? So I think we just need a little bit more buy-in sometimes from our own clients, as well as to work a little more speedily to get some of these solutions.
That question now, are there things that are working in your favor? Because sometimes you're in the system and you've seen some of the things that have worked, you've seen some of the things that haven't necessarily worked as well. So you're able to adopt the things that are best fit for purpose. What are some of those things that are working in your favor? Because, okay, you started kind of new and fresh, but also having an idea of the context and the lay of the land.
Absolutely. I think, as we say, COVID could have been a disadvantage, but one of the things we actually use COVID for is to provide significant amount of training. And I think one of the advantages of being a department, and we have about 29 attorneys on staff, it means that when you're doing training, as compared to being in private practice, when it's one attorney, two attorneys in many different areas, in many different chambers and so forth, when you have a group in a department like this, it makes facilitation of those type of things easier. So we have invested a lot of time and effort into training. We have approached stakeholders to be able to get that type of assistance. We have also used just the sheer ability of seeing what is happening. We know that we have so many persons in the prisons. We recognize that going to the prisons in COVID was not feasible. So we were able to put in a virtual system. So some of those things have really benefited us. And then the judiciary is also moving to a more digital interface. So we also have been able to aim towards doing that as well. So I think watching what the other stakeholders are doing and then also trying to assess what works best for us has really helped in the process.
And you talk about those 29 attorneys, and I like the fact that it's almost as though you're considering it a learning organization. So this is happening on a consistent basis. Is there a mind shift when you're doing this kind of thing from the public side to the private side? Because if someone has me on a routine, I could see, okay, well, it makes sense for me to have something go a little longer versus, okay, well, let's come to a resolution. So are there any of those kind of things or tweaks that have to take place on a mental aspect at the PDD?
Well, I think a lot of us who are at the PDD now, we would have practiced previously, at the private bar. So, yes, there were always advantages if you were being paid per court appearance, for example. I think that there's always that you would have that in mind. But I think for us, what has really worked to our advantage in terms of being a training organization and focusing on that training is that because we have 29 attorneys of different tiers, it means every time we try to train, we have to train from step one. And I think that has So it means that some of us are getting refreshers, but others are learning from that step one, which I think is important. And then overall, it allows us to have quality control and policies that we can put in place that may not have existed at the private bar. And I think that is also very important because it means that you have sufficient oversight, you have sufficient seniority in terms of attorneys who are assisting. And I think that type of experience, and just sometimes you need that level of guidance for younger attorneys who are coming out. So I think that is really important, and it's something that we have put a lot of emphasis on.
And we want to speak to some of the other things that you've put emphasis on in just a little bit, but we take a short break. We are speaking with the Chief Public Defender, Hasine Shaikh. Stay with us. We return with more. Welcome back. We are speaking with the Chief Public Defender, Hasine Shaikh. And one of the things, and just before we took the break, you spoke about the ability to have a level of oversight, quality control, and people who've just come out learn, as opposed to, okay, well, you fall flat on your face and you learn from your mistakes like that. But tell me though, what are some of the matters? Are there specific matters? Because you spoke to different tiers of attorneys. Are there different tiers of matters or different types of matters that your department would deal with specifically?
Yeah, so we deal with matters primarily at the high court level, which tend to be the more serious matters. So in terms of how we divide it in tiers, the attorneys that are over 5 years call are able to do capital matters. So that's murders. And so it also means that the younger attorneys who are less than 5 years calls, they are able to instruct, which essentially means they assist the more senior attorneys on the matter. Now that's a important tool of learning because it allows them to see how it is done, learn, and essentially build that skill set. Now, murders are not obviously the only matters we do. We do sexual offenses, trafficking, wounding, a number of offenses. But it means that what we do when we're assigning a matter is that we assess each matter to determine what is the level of complexity and who is the best person to treat for that matter. Because ultimately, our concern is always to ensure that the client is getting the best quality representation.
And with that in mind, I want to ask, what is the difference between, and I'm still getting a bit used to saying PDD instead of DPP. What was the difference between the PDD and legal aid? Or can they be used interchangeably?
So the Public Defender's Department is a department that was established under the Legal Aid and Advisory Authority. So we're the criminal aspect of it, and there is also the civil advisory who deal with civil matters. So it's a two-pronged approach. So the Legal Aid Advisory Authority is the overriding organization, and we fall in departments under that. So it's not that necessarily that it's used interchangeably, but it is the Public Defender's Department of the Legal Aid and Advisory Authority.
And if someone has the wherewithal to say, okay, well, I can afford to choose the lawyer or the attorney that I want, rather. How do we, I don't know if sell is a good term, but how do we influence them and say, well, this is a good choice? The PDD, you can get what you need from them.
Well, ultimately, if you can afford to pay your own attorney, I would absolutely advise you to do that because it means that you have the means to do so. And you should have an attorney of your choice and someone that you're comfortable with. That's a priority and that's paramount for any person who is before the court. But for those persons who cannot afford and who qualify for legal aid, why I would say that the Public Defender's Department is a viable option is simply because we work hard. We ensure that we have the necessary training. As I told you, we have the oversight to ensure that we catch mistakes, we deal with the issues before the court. And essentially, there are enough attorneys here of sufficient experience. And then for those who don't have experience, we are ensuring that they're getting that training, both in the office and on the job in terms of doing the matters before the court. And I would go on to say just a little bit that, our record is pretty good. When you look at it, we have done about 17 trials. Of those 17 trials, we would have had verdicts. We haven't had a single hung jury come back thus far. We've had about 58 matters concluded by way of plea. And I want to emphasize that the Public Defender's Department, as in with any defense attorney, it's not about the guilty or the not guilty verdict. It is ultimately about providing quality representation. So a plea, which means that you essentially took responsibility for your actions and pleaded before the court and got a sentence, does not necessarily mean that you did not accomplish what you're supposed to do. That is performance by the department as well, because that is essentially the instructions of that particular client and what they wish to do, because it's always based on instructions.
And looking from 2020 to now, and you spoke about those 17 trials, so just hitting the ground running, what were some of the things that you had in mind to do? And have they happened the way that you envisioned them?
Well, the beauty, pros and cons, I guess, of having a brand new department starting from scratch is that you get to craft it in a particular way. So one of the things that we aimed to do, for example, was a complete process of digitization. So everything that we have in terms of our files operate in a digital framework. We don't have paper files. We print things only if absolutely necessary. Why is that important? It allows us to have that oversight because it means no matter where you are, whether you're in San Fernando Court or Tobago, I can access your files if you need advice. So that's important. So that was one of the things that we set out to deal with. One of the other things that we really prioritized in terms of dealing with the backlog was trying to identify those matters that could be a viable plea. Now, that's really important as well because it means that there are persons who wanted to plead guilty and who were not able to do so. So we would have worked together with the judiciary as well as the DPP's office in terms of having what we call the fast track court, which is persons who wish to plead guilty. We try to ensure that all of their documents are in place to allow them to do so. So that's another initiative that has been working really well. And I think those are some of the areas that we have really seen some level of progress on. Of course, as we move forward, and as I said, COVID did put a little bit of, a spoke in our wheel, so to speak. But now that we have moved back to more active trials, we have quite a combination of the judge alone as well as jury trials ongoing. So that means that we find ourselves more and more in court and then actively treating with the matters, which I think is important.
There's a phrase used as we move forward, and that also brings into focus the fact that originally you would have been on for 2 years, now you're on for 3 years again. So congratulations for that. Is that almost a feeling of validation? So yes, what I'm doing is making a difference and it is seen, so able to go forward a little bit. And if it was just politician, people would say, okay, well, your mandate has been reaffirmed. But how does that, what's the significance of that for you?
I think the significance essentially is that not just for myself, but for most of the persons in the department, because, everybody has more or less been renewed. It shows that we are doing what we were brought here to do, and we are achieving the goals that have been set out for us. Now, whether we can do more, I'm certain we can, but in terms of it being a successful debut of a new department, I think it definitely is. So it is a sense of validation to an extent, but of course, it also shows that we have started working and there is a lot more to do.
All right, and with that, we pull the curtains down on this conversation. But like I said, this is just part one. Speaking with the Chief Public Defender, Hasine Shaikh. Thank you so much for making the time, and we're looking forward to the second part of it.
Great. I'm looking forward to it too. Thank you.
All right, and this has been In Depth with me, Dike Rostant, on behalf of the entire TTT team. Thank you so much for joining us.